Trojan fans, welcome to another edition of the Peristyle Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Abraham, publisher of USCFootball.com, joined alongside Mr. Triple Double himself, Connor Morrissette. Connor, what's up, man? What's up going on, man?
Not much. Welcome back stateside. How was your trip?
It was good. I am back. Was in Hawaii for work for the Polynesian Bowl because that's tough stuff you got to cover. And then I ended up going to Tokyo and to Thailand, Bangkok. Was walking around the Grand Palace, listening to the national championship game because I couldn't really get some of the football stuff there, like streaming. Like I have YouTube TV. It doesn't let you stream overseas, but I could listen on like ESPN radio. So yeah, didn't get to watch the national championship game, but I was listening, so that was cool.
You didn't miss too much. Notre Dame, for some reason, decided to kick that field goal. I wish they had gone for it and ultimately could have used those points at the end. So good win for Ohio State. And I think Ohio State winning shows that the college football playoff is a success, right? Because they wouldn't have made it, in the old format. So I know the first round games weren't too competitive, but I certainly think it's a step in the right direction.
I thought it was a great little tournament. I liked it. I mean, timing and all that stuff could be different, but I like the college football playoff. It was pretty fun, and you kind of realized early on, like, okay, Ohio State figured it out, and it's like, okay, they're going to just make this run, and they just walloped everybody. But yeah, it was kind of cool to see. For USC fans, you'd probably rather have a Ohio State win than Notre Dame, I think. So I think, but I liked it. I think the ratings for the actual championship game were down, but
yeah,
if you look at the overall picture, just having all those successful games, yeah, there were some really good ones. There were some blowouts and stuff too, but some good stuff. Hey, we're live on YouTube. If you are following along, I'll put your comments up on the screen. We got some marks in there saying hello, Ryan at Triple Double. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm getting I literally just got back in yesterday trying to figure out what part of the world I'm in and what time it is, but I actually got to bed fairly early, or like 11 o'clock or so, like a normal thing. I landed at like 10:30 in the morning, get back, my place at like noonish, and took a little nap because I was exhausted. You're traveling for like 20-something hours. But then stayed up till like 11, had a couple beers, stayed up till 11, and just passed out. So that was good. So I'm a little out of it, but I think just trying to get back on that normal cycle when you're a 15-hour time difference, it can kind of mess you up a little bit.
Yeah, good for you for getting right back onto it. 11 p.m. bedtime, that sounds good.
It was pretty good. Not too bad. If you have questions for us, we got some questions to answer. Podcast at USCFootball.com. I think we did a show right before I left for Hawaii. And right when I get back, we're doing another one. But we'll keep doing them throughout the offseason. You can send us your questions there or call or text us at 424-254-9141. We also love the reviews. You can leave a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, the former iTunes. And on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave us a 5-star review. I don't think we have any new ones, but thank you for anyone that left reviews. We appreciate that. So leave us a new one, and it'll help out everything. And Trader Joe's is back, Connor. While I was traveling, talked to our buddy John and Brea from Trader Joe's. They'll be around for another season.
All right.
Yeah, so that's cool. We love the relationship with them. I don't even know how many years it's been, like 6-7 years or something, but amazing that a great company like that would sponsor our show. So being gone for like almost 2 weeks, after the show, I'm going to head over to Trader Joe's and stock up a little bit.
Yeah, you got to restock.
Yeah, there's some stuff in the fridge. You're like, oh, I shouldn't have left that for 2 weeks, so throw that away. But yeah, go back, to get the staples, like milk and eggs and things like that. And then, get some of my other fun stuff. I like getting the different cheeses and just having those for snacks sitting around the house. Of course, you got to get some sweet stuff too. Like there's different. I like to try out the different cookies. Of course, the chocolate covered anything there is good. So, but I got to go back to Trader Joe's. Thanks to John again, and we're excited for another year of sponsorship with Trader Joe's.
Yeah, thank you, Trader Joe's. Thank you, John. I'm very excited for another year of sponsorship as well, and it's fun covering USC right now, Ryan. The climb to try to compete in the Big Ten and get into the college football playoff. I appreciate covering the climb, and we have a lot to talk about today with Rob Ryan coming in and some of the stuff with D'Anton Lynn. That climb that I'm talking about almost took a big hit with Lynn almost leaving to Penn State, so I'm sure we'll get into that. But, thank you to Trader Joe's and thank you to John.
Yeah, and everyone, if you are watching us live on either Facebook or YouTube, if you have a question, put question in there in the live chat, and I will start and get back to it later. We can get to your questions. But, we got to talk about sort of what's been going on in the world of USC football since I was gallivanting across Asia for a little bit after Hawaii. We'll talk about what I saw in Hawaii, too, at the Polynesian Bowl. 5 future or current Trojans, their freshman USC football players were participating. I think next year they're going to move to almost an exclusive junior model, so there will be more prospects. So maybe you have some USC commits, but not signees or enrollees, and then other prospects that haven't signed yet that USC is still recruiting. That's when it was more fun. You're covering these games where, players would make announcements and stuff. Now you're covering the games and the players are already enrolled in school. So, but Hassan Longstreet, the USC quarterback commit or signing or enrollee, who already took part in bowl practices, was co-offensive MVP. So that was pretty cool. He threw 3 touchdowns. So we'll get into all that kind of stuff. But we got to talk about the coaching staff, and no question things got better on the defensive side of the ball this year when USC brought over D'Anton Lynn from UCLA. We'll start with him because D'Anton Lynn certainly a key part of USC's resurgence on the defensive side of the ball. So much better than it was before. Lincoln Riley needed some help over there, and there was a real run made at him. He became a popular candidate, and we saw Penn State, in a weird sort of move, lose their defensive coordinator to Clemson. So not even one of the Power 2 schools, but, Clemson, a team that's won a national championship, a couple of them, fairly recently. So they're out looking for a DC, and lo and behold, they're going to try to take USC's defensive coordinator. So this is one of those first Big Ten tests that, hey, can USC step up and keep him? I guess there were some reporters out there from USC saying that was smokescreen. He wasn't a candidate. He certainly was a candidate.
He was their top candidate.
He was their top candidate. I put in the war room, I guess a week or so ago, that there was an in-home visit.
Yep.
James Franklin came to Los Angeles and met with D'Anton Lynn. It was very, very real. They were going to pay a very, very much a lot of money, and USC had to very, very much step up to keep D'Anton Lynn. And I think psychologically it would be a pretty big blow for him to go to Penn State. And USC did what they needed to do and kept him. So I thought it was a really big move. You needed to keep that sort of continuity going on the defensive side of the ball, and keeping D'Anton Lynn did that. But I wanted to get your thoughts, Connor, on USC retaining and extending D'Anton Lynn.
Before USC men's basketball beat Iowa on Tuesday, January 14th, I was sitting in the USC hotel parking garage waiting to walk over to the game, and I got a text from a source who said, I think you're going to lose your defensive coordinator, or you might lose your defensive coordinator. And I was like, oh, geez. So guess this Penn State stuff is pretty real. And then the next night, that's when everything heated up and people were tracking the private jets. Do you remember seeing that on social media, Ryan, where there was a flight from Pennsylvania to San Diego or to Santa Ana, I think, and people were freaking out. And then James Franklin was at Mater Dei with a bunch of the USC coaches. So that interest was definitely real, and there was mutual interest too. A lot of times on the message boards, we post what we get, and then if people don't want to hear it or don't like the news, they'll assume that it's wrong or we're making it up. That goes so far up my you-know-what. So reported that there was mutual interest, and then a couple hours go by, and I talked to someone else who said, Lynn, it sounds like he's going to stay at USC, so I put that on our board. Hopefully that calms some people down, and he ends up staying. But, yeah, credit to USC and everyone in the athletic department, Lincoln Riley, whatever happened, money, of course, helped, but I'm sure Riley had a conversation with Lynn, too. Whatever they did to keep him is huge because you lose him, and then, man, this next season looks a lot different. My big takeaway, Ryan, it would have been so easy for Lynn to walk away from USC and Lincoln Riley if he felt like this was a sinking ship. I'm not going to be able to accomplish what I want to accomplish. I don't feel supported the way I need to be supported.
Yeah.
Maybe working with Riley wasn't good. It would have been so easy for him just to go to Penn State, his alma mater, coach their defense, and maybe go to the NFL after if he didn't believe in USC. And yes, the money helps, but I think it's very big for Lincoln Riley that D'Anton Lynn comes back, because we've seen some people in the past with Riley, they kind of clash heads. It doesn't work. It seems to me like Lynn and Riley do work well together, and Lynn, again, the money helps, but has a belief that next season can be better. He's beefed up the interior of that defensive line. I'm glad that he managed to stay, because if he had left, then you start to think, oh, man, it might be harder to win here at USC than we have thought if you lose your star defensive coordinator. And it wasn't a money thing. It was just I can't work with Lincoln Riley thing. Those two continue to work together. That's a huge step in the right direction.
I agree. And being the first year in the Big Ten, you wanted to be a factor, and USC had the schedule and the roster to be a factor and did not. They fell flat, and that's unfortunate, losing to some of the teams that they lost to. And Oregon comes in, obviously makes a big splash. Ohio State wins the national championship. They were right there with Penn State, right there with Notre Dame, but just kind of fell short. If you also end up getting one of your coaches poached by one of the traditional Big Ten powers, I think that's a bad look also. So just coming in and like, all right, I know we stunk this. It's like you're sort of coming in, hey, I know we stunk this year, but we're still a player. You're not going to we're going to pay a bunch of money to keep our coordinators if you want to take them, and we want to keep them. We are not going to be second-class citizens. At least that's, you got to act like that. Like, hey, you can't come in. I mean, UCLA losing their head coach to be the offensive coordinator at Penn State, at Ohio State. That's obviously, there was a lot more factors in that. That's a big move, losing your head coach. DC to DC, it's more of a lateral move, but still that's showing you like, okay, this is a higher up on the hierarchy power. So USC saying like, no, you're not higher up on the hierarchy than us. We're going to keep our DC. You can't just come in and take him, even though he played there and there was a lot of factors. So I think it's a big deal that USC keeps him.
Certainly. I agree with that too. I mean, look at what happened at UCLA. You mentioned Chip Kelly. Well, Lynn was at UCLA before, and then he comes over to USC. UCLA couldn't come close to paying Lynn what USC was paying him. So that's sort of a big boy move. And USC, it wouldn't have been a good look if they then the next year turn around and got big boyed by Penn State. So, yeah, I'm totally with you. And now next season, there's a reason to be a lot more optimistic, because if you lose Lynn, then I don't know what that means for some of the guys on the roster, the future of the transfer portal in the spring window. If someone else is the defensive coordinator, everything that you built up from last season with the returning players takes a hit. That would not have been good. To continue to take steps in the right direction with this rebuild, D'Anton Lynn was going to be a huge part of it. Now, say he left for the NFL, I wouldn't have had as big of an issue with it. He's been an NFL guy for much longer than he was in college, but optically losing him to Penn State, like if you're a recruit who has options and you think, okay, I want to play defense at the highest level, USC, I like what they did last year. Oh, that coordinator who had that success is now gone and he went to Penn State, a team in that same league. Like, I don't think you're getting top-end talent, even if you can pay guys a lot, because just optically losing your defensive coordinator like that, it would not be good. So, yeah, it's huge to retain him, and I'm excited to see what USC does in the spring transfer window, because I still think they have some needs defensively, but you got your DC locked in. That's huge.
It's a big deal, and I think helping, people were asking on the boards, like when I was posting some of the stuff from the War Room, and, I talked in there about this next hire helping with like retention, and I'd mentioned D'Anton Lynn and Eric Henderson, Coach Henney as well. And people were like, "Oh, was he going to leave too?" I'm like, the point is, if D'Anton Lynn left, all bets are off on the entire defensive staff. You don't know, and anyone can leave at that point. He could take people with him. People could just jump ship because they were there because of Lynn and his leadership and all of that. So, yeah, I think just keeping him solidifies the staff too. And then the guy that USC brought in to coach linebackers, from what, I was told from my sources that, this was someone that D'Anton Lynn really admired and wanted to bring in. So making this hire, I think probably it helps with the retention as well. So there was all kind of a factor of putting everything in the right place for, you pay D'Anton Lynn, a lot of money, but also kind of give him what he wants personnel-wise, spending money in the portal, and then also on the assistant staff to try to make this the best staff possible. I thought Matt Entz did a great job. You need to replace them. You didn't think he was going to be around that long. He was a national championship winning college head coach. And then you bring in a guy with a lot of NFL experience. And I think the reviews have been kind of mixed, but we're talking about Rob Ryan, who comes in to he's the assistant head coach for defense and then the linebackers coach at USC.
I like this hire because of what you said. He's a D'Anton Lynn guy, and looking at what happened with Matt Entz last season, great coach, was very transparent about his goals, wanting to become a head coach again. Did he ever seem like a Lincoln Riley or a D'Anton Lynn guy to you, Ryan? To me, he seemed like a guy who just was way overqualified for this role, and it was a no-brainer to bring him in, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. USC got a lot out of their linebackers last season. Entz did a good job. But if he was closer with Riley or closer with Lynn, maybe he takes the Fresno State job the day after signing day and they are able to do better recruiting-wise. What I'm trying to say is I like that Rob Ryan is really tied in with D'Anton Lynn. They have a relationship. They are friendly. They are going to do really well together because they've coached together in the past. So I like that piece of it. And I think it's important to have guys you can really trust. And obviously, Entz was hired at USC, and they trusted him. But I didn't get the sense that he was a Riley guy or he was a Lynn guy, where like Doug Belk, he coached under Dana Holgorsen in Houston. Even though Riley didn't have experience with him, he was more of a Riley guy. Henderson was in the NFL. He had that season with Lynn. He was more of a Lynn guy. I like those connections. So I like Ryan in that regard. I don't really know what he's going to be like as a recruiter. I don't really feel like he'll be here for the long term. Of course, he's an older guy. I think as long as Lynn's here, Ryan will potentially be here, but I don't know how long Lynn will be here. I wouldn't be shocked if a year from now he's a hot name in the NFL for a defensive coordinator spot. So from a recruiting standpoint, is it ideal? Probably not, but looking at what USC has done recruiting linebackers, they whiffed last cycle, but you do have some good young players who I think will help or who will be benefited by working with Rob Ryan. What they need, though, now is a one-and-done stud from the spring window to pair with Gentry and Desmond Stevens. Sell that player on Rob Ryan, on D'Anton Lynn, get a one-and-done guy who enters the portal after spring practice, bring him in for the summer, and you're good to go. I still think they could really benefit from adding a big-time linebacker, pay whatever it takes, sell him on Ryan, like I said, and get him in. And hopefully in a one-and-done scenario, you can sell a high-profile linebacker from the portal on Rob Ryan because of all of his experience as a linebackers coach, defensive coordinator in the NFL. Same with Lynn as a coach in the NFL. That is very appealing to a one-and-done guy, and I think the hire makes a lot of sense in that way.
Yeah, it's weird. Like when I was posting this, I teased in the war room, like I knew who they were going to hire, but they were working through the details. I just wanted to kind of put it out there. And then the mixed reviews are sort of interesting. And I don't know how many linebacker coaches you can name across the country. There's just, it's not like this high profile position. And you get a guy that's, the name, it's a famous football name. There's a lot of NFL ties. He's won Super Bowl. There's been a lot of stuff, and people are sort of complaining about, well, lately he did this or got fired here or whatever. And it's like, it's probably a one or two, linebacker coach thing. The name. He's been on like TV and all this stuff. If D'Anton Lynn, who you trust as a defensive coordinator, likes him and thinks he can help, coach linebackers, like, okay, like I don't get what people would be kind of up in arms about. Sometimes people just complain, I don't know, for the sake of complaining. I'm not sure if that's what's happening here, but people were really on it. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, you want a guy that can work with the defensive staff, and he's definitely got a big enough name. We'll see. Maybe it doesn't work out. It's hard to say. But I just, for people that are saying, oh, this is going to be a terrible hire, like, really? It's like the linebacker coach? Like, okay, it's like, if it was like your boy Bill Belichick, like getting a defensive coordinator to call offensive plays, you're like, all right, like, I mean, on the high level, like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But this is sort of like, okay, this guy coming in, and the other fact of the recruiting aspect, and just so people know, like it used to just be your 10 offensive assistants or be the guys that could go out on the road. They've changed the rules a little bit, so you could essentially have a whole nother staff that's recruiting on the road. So if you have, like I think Penn State's coordinators weren't traveling for recruiting. They would have recruiting staffers sort of take their place. And a Rob Ryan guy's not going to be out on the road recruiting, but I think he could be an asset when he gets to campus. I mean, he knows so much football. And, if you have aspirations to be in the NFL, it's cool to talk to a guy that's coached a bunch of studs in the NFL, So I don't have an issue with the recruiting side or whatever. Recruiting is definitely different. People are kind of stuck the way it was. It might get to the point where you have your 10 assistant coaches that coach, and you have like your 10 assistant traveling recruiting guys that travel, So that's sort of just the way I kind of look at it. But there was definitely some people that were like, oh, this is going to be terrible. And like, it's the linebacker coach hire. I don't know. Seemed fine to me, but there's some pushback on her.
I remembered that thread. I posted that I thought he would be a great coach. Wasn't sure on the recruiting front. Coach Baugh is going to do a lot of that in-person recruiting stuff. He's a analyst. I forget his exact title. He's not an official assistant, but he's been on the road a lot, and he has a very bright future in coaching. And if Rob Ryan ends up leaving either a year or two from now, I could see Coach Baugh sliding up into his role, and he's been doing a nice job recruiting. I look at Eric Henderson as the gold standard of an assistant coach, where he has that NFL pedigree. He is an amazing coach. No one doubts that. And then he doubles down and is a fantastic recruiter, hits the road, does everything that you want an assistant coach to do, has that Aaron Donald relationship. He's pretty perfect as an assistant coach.
Yeah.
So is Rob Ryan that? No. But you're not going to get a perfect assistant every time. And I like Rob Ryan as a coach for sure. How can you not? The concerns, he hasn't been in college since, I think, 1999. So it's been a little bit. And he's not going to be on the road recruiting, as you reported on our website. But when you bring guys into campus, he'll certainly be there. He was on campus. Gavin Morris posted a video with him yesterday. So I'm not going to come out and say, like, oh, I don't love the hire. I think anyone who's going to work well with D'Anton Lynn, who has that experience, how can you not like it? But I understand the questions about him as a recruiter, especially coming off of a cycle where USC whiffed on a good amount of their linebacker targets. So that makes sense to me. But in terms of a one-and-done, 1 or 2 year linebacker guy, if Lynn ends up leaving for the NFL in a couple years, there's not a lot to hate about him from a coaching perspective, but the recruiting questions I get.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see. If you're in the chat, let us know. I know. I think Jace Pulvita said he likes the hire. I'm cool with it. Again, it's the linebacker coach. After talking to him, I think we'll get a better feel. When USC hired Matt Entz, and they're like, hey, this guy won a national championship as a head coach, multiple national championships as a head coach at the FCS level, there were USC fans on the board being like, well, but they won the first 2 with the other guys' players, and they've kind of gone downhill a little bit since. And you're like, he's your linebacker coach, and you're talking about justifying his national championships as the head coach. Sometimes it doesn't make sense what you're complaining about there. So, but the first time we talked to Entz, I was like, yep, this is going to be good. And you saw guys like Eric Gentry, it rejuvenated his career, and you just got a feel from the beginning, like, this guy is going to work out. I don't think he'll be around long. He's going to be a good linebacker coach. I think by all accounts, he was a really good linebacker coach. Hopefully get to talk to Rob Ryan soon and get a similar feel or not, be like, I don't think he gets, you talk to him and you're like, I don't think he's going to get this college game. Or you'd be like, oh my God, he's super, I hate Pete Carroll comparisons. I'm not comparing to Pete Carroll, but Pete Carroll was an NFL guy and had college like a long time ago, but had that sort of energy to deal with college students. So we'll see when we get to talk to Rob Ryan. Like what kind of energy he has. Check out that video with Gavin. It seems like he's doing the fight on the card or whatever. So I think it's going to work out fine. But, to me, it's, hey, D'Anton Lynn, one of them, perfect. And you don't always write the right guy. Sometimes you want to hire somebody because they believe in your system or whatever, and it doesn't work out. But I have some faith that this one's going to be it'll be a good fit for USC.
I will say with Entz, some people did question his recruiting chops, and that ended up being a fair criticism. So
yeah,
I think the Ryan criticism in that regard makes a lot of sense, especially after some fans felt like they were burned by Entz because, remember, he wasn't talking to Madden Faremo in the summer, and then he was, and we all remember what happened on signing day. So USC has Xavier Griffin, one of the top linebackers in the country, number 1 in the 247 rankings in 2026. He might become an edge, but right now he's a linebacker. And his recruitment is tied into Eric Henderson. So that's another boost. You have this stud linebacker already committed in 2026. As long as Eric Henderson's in the fold, I feel like USC has a really good shot with him. And so that's like one check. USC's going to try to bring in a couple other linebackers, so that makes Rob Ryan's job easier. He already has this 5-star guy locked in. He'll, of course, open dialogue with Griffin and work to get him in the mix come signing day, but that is more of an Eric Henderson recruitment than a Rob Ryan recruitment, and he can now focus on other targets. So having that big fish already on the board is pretty significant too, and that should help him as a recruiter.
And I think just the whole recruiting aspect of it, it's a different beast now. And was Matt Entz going to be a great recruit? I mean, I don't think you expect him, the guy that's coming in, the former head coach who's coaching your linebackers. That's why you have assistants that are going to be on the road. Was Entz on the road? I don't think he was, right?
He went to Chicago. He was on the road.
Okay. And to me, that's more of a management thing. Like, I don't want to bring that guy to come in and then I'm going to put him on the road. Like, he's probably not going to have the enthusiasm. You take a Coach Baugh or somebody like that, a younger recruiting staff, younger staffer that can get out on the road and have energy and still, relate to the players, the prospects and everything. I think that's the way you're going, that you don't necessarily need to be the road recruiter. You could still host, DM guys, call them whatever. I think there's a lot of that aspect, but it's more of it's sort of like a machine that everyone is it's like, well, your linebacker coach isn't a good recruiter. Well, there's enough people around that you have to make it work. If you have some guy that's just going to be an in the office, coach the players up, dude, that's fine. You have to build the system around him that you don't lose out on recruiting. So I don't look at it as one individual guy not being a good recruiter. You have to make this systematically work because you have a lot more options. It's not just, hey, man, he's the best special teams coordinator, but he's never going to go out on the road. Well, you don't have to. You got someone that's just a really good coach. You let him be a coach, and you hire someone else to do the recruiting aspect of it. That's just the way you can work in college football now. So to me, it's more about, hey, make it work. You get a great coach. He was a great linebacker coach. I don't care if he can't do any other things. Let him coach linebackers. Let him made those guys better. You figure out from a system side, what you need to do recruiting. You can't let guys not get called and say, well, this guy wasn't a good recruiter. No, you have to have enough people around him to make it a good recruiting system, not this guy's not good, so you're not going to recruit linebackers well, if that makes sense.
And it sounds like USC is going in that direction where Coach Baugh is the point of contact for a lot of these linebackers. And Ryan, I'm sure, will have a relationship with them. He'll get them on the phone when they come to campus. He's such a big name, such an energetic guy that he'll make an impression on campus too. So I agree with you. There are ways around it. USC's hiring a general manager, which the clock keeps ticking on that. We'll see eventually when that hire gets made, but that's another step in the right direction from a recruiting standpoint where you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. So I'm with you. If one guy on a staff isn't necessarily this great recruiter, I mean, there are a million ways to overcome that.
Yes.
USC in the last cycle did not do a very good job of overcoming that at linebacker. Let's see if they learn from their mistakes.
Yeah. Like, I'm not going to put all that on Entz's plate.
No.
This is you know him. He made your linebackers better. That's what you brought him in for. You figure out the recruiting stuff. And that's, to me, more about organizationally, they still haven't figured a lot of that out. Having a general manager, I think, helps. That's more of an overseer of things. And if they'll know, hey, you're not talking to this local 4-star linebacker enough, and be able to pull the right buttons and levers and figure that stuff out. So, so the defensive staff looking good. Not a lot of changes, but you get your new linebacker coach. You got your DC locked up. I think making the roster better should make the defense better, unlike what the jump from 2022 to 2023. Having great coaches in place, and I think they have some really great coaches that are overqualified, and then you pair that up with some better players, and they should be a lot better on defense. And then Lincoln Riley's got to figure out the offensive side. Obviously.
Well, do you want to get into the defense a little bit? I do think they have the potential to be better. I'm just fixated. They need another linebacker. I already mentioned that. Kamari Ramsey and Bishop Fitzgerald, it sounds like they have those two safety spots locked down. Right now, the nickel is Prophet Brown. Right now, the corner is Marcellus Williams and probably DeCarlos Nicholson, who entered the portal and then came back out.
Yeah.
So could you upgrade nickel? Could you upgrade corner? They've tried. They haven't had success there. So maybe in the spring window, they've, without a doubt, upgraded the middle of the defensive line. No one is doubting that with Keyshawn Silver, Jamal Jarrett, those guys in the middle, big bodies. They do want to bring in another edge rusher. So I do think they have work to be done in the spring window with an edge rusher, with some secondary guys, with a linebacker. But now that the staff is in place and they know what they have, we'll see after spring practice if they feel the same way that I do. I do expect them to make some moves after spring ball. And if they do, then I'll be a little bit more bullish on the defense than I am right now. But I do think they're trending in the right direction, and locking down the staff was massive.
Yeah, you needed that. What's your best assets? And you knew D'Anton Lynn was one of them.
Yeah.
So you got to keep him. Someone came after him. You got to keep him, do your best. And they were able to do that. So that's a big deal.
I mean, he's your best asset player or coach other than Riley. And people will debate, where Riley stands right now. But you know what I mean? Like, if you lost, what would be the worst possible loss? Like, if Maeva leaves, like, I feel like you can replace him. If Eric Gentry leaves, that would have been a big loss, but he wasn't available last season. Kamari Ramsey goes to the draft. He's a safety. You can replace him, but you probably won't get as good of play. Like, if Lynn leaves, I think that is worst case scenario, number one person who you do not want to have leave, and they bring him back. Very big.
Yeah. USC Priority says, right now, nobody's guaranteed a spot. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, there's no like, oh, this is you need this guy more than anybody. I think D'Anton Lynn was that guy. You needed him to keep that continuity on the defense.
Kamari Ramsey is guaranteed the starting safety.
Yeah, so he's definitely, if they had to pay you like $1 million or whatever to stay, like you're going to start. Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Poly Bowl.
Yeah,
as well.
Who impressed you?
Yeah, so I got to interview. So we put up all the stories on USCFootball.com. If you missed it, Husan Longstreet was the offensive MVP of the game. He ended up throwing 3 touchdowns. So got watched them a couple days in practice. He was certainly impressive. I think there's a reason for optimism. The arm talent is certainly.
Yeah, how far did he throw that ball that one day?
The challenge, they did like these challenges after each practice, body armor challenges, and I think it was 78 yards in the air.
Jeez.
He ended up throwing that. So pretty impressive. But so he was there. A late addition was Alex Graham out of Michigan, who went down to IMG, came back to Michigan. Was playing corner and came a day late because there was a late invite or whatever. But he was really impressive in the day that I was able to see him. Matai Togiai, he's a kind of a thinner linebacker, but he was definitely taller than me when I interviewed him. He moved around really well. Just when you watch him play, and it's hard for linebackers in these kind of events, but moving side to side, sideline to sideline, I thought he was. Impressive, kind of looking to see what he could do. Sort of an Eric Gentry thing where you got to put some weight on him. And Tanook Hines was one of the more surprising ones to me. Speedster, you didn't know much about him outside of Houston, right? I believe. And man, he had a lot of confidence. You haven't really seen him in those kind of situations, but he came in there and there were some bigger name receivers, but he sort of threw his hat in the ring, was just like, I can play with all these guys, and had some really nice connections with Longstreet. So that was cool. And then Tristan Castro was the other DB out there that, looked good moving around and everything and got some length to him. So those were the 5 guys from USC. I got highlights of all of them. We put them up on the YouTube channel, but put them up on USCFootball.com as well. But it was cool to see a high-profile guy like Longstreet look good in practice and then showcase that in the game and end up being the offensive MVP.
In terms of next season, Hines might be the player who has the biggest role. So it's encouraging to see you talk about him competing with some players who are ranked above him. And I know he's a speedster. You just look at how the depth chart breaks down at receiver for USC. It's obviously Lane and Lemon at the top, but with all the guys leaving, there is an opening, and USC added Prince Strachan, I think that's how you say it, from Boise State, who has a very high ceiling, who just started playing football in high school. He comes from the Bahamas, so he'll be in the mix. Jay Fair will probably be in the mix. And then it's a bunch of young guys. So
yeah,
Tanu Hines could certainly factor in. And is he an early enrollee? I don't remember. If he is, that'll be a bigger boost for him.
I forget. I think he's running track, I believe.
Okay, so that might hurt.
So he's still doing track. I know there was. So I think 2 or 3 of the guys were early enrollees. They're already enrolled.
Yeah.
Longstreet being one of them. Like they got to. I think Graham was too.
Yeah.
So Graham, he got to USC and then got this invite. He had to fly to Hawaii.
Had to do it.
Yes, you got to do it. I asked all the guys about their flights, and especially the ones coming from outside of California. It's a lot further to go to Hawaii. But yeah, so it's weird. They missed their first few days of classes because of the Polynesian Bowl. So that's why I think going forward they're going to try to do this more of a junior thing, which makes sense. But yeah, it was good to see those guys out there. I think USC was well represented for sure. And Hines is one of those guys who just because he's kind of from far away, you didn't really, but to see him in person and see how he moved and see how he ran routes and caught the ball, you're like, all right, this. It looks to me, he looked like a guy that could play.
All right, well, keep that in mind, USC fans, because come fall camp, he won't be involved in spring camp, but come fall camp, he'll certainly be someone in the mix. So I do think out of that group, maybe Longstreet can push Maava, but Hines should be right in the mix to play a role as a receiver as a true freshman, which is very exciting.
Yeah, USA Priority says Matai and Hines are not an early enrollees. Yeah, okay. So Hines told me he was running track, and then
yeah, I knew Matai wasn't.
Yeah, but I do think the other guys all are. So yeah, but it's good to see them. Again, there's highlights and stuff up on the site if you want to see them kind of moving around and everything. And Longstreet delivering the ball, very, I was impressed with what he was able to do. So good stuff there, and hope you guys enjoyed all of that. Let's see, anything else? So we mentioned DeCarlos Nicholson. We weren't sure if he was going to get an extra year of eligibility, but because of the JC stuff, he ends up apparently getting one because he entered the portal. So we just assumed, okay, we didn't hear that he had got an extra year. We just saw he went to the portal. You're like, well, he must have an extra year, otherwise he wouldn't go to the portal, and then withdraws his name from the portal. So he'll be back. USC needs some cornerback depth, so they get to keep DeCarlos Nicholson, who originally transferred in from Mississippi State.
I don't have much insight into what happened. I wonder if it was just as simple as an NIL thing, or maybe they told him we're going to bring in more corners and you'll have to compete. I have no idea, but glad that he's back because USC does need some help at the corner spot, and if you lose him, then they were really in trouble, just lacking a lot of experience. So I think as it stands right now, DJ Harvey and DeCarlos Nicholson are probably the starting boundary corners, but Marcellus Williams will be in that mix, Braylon Connolly too. USC, I think, will add another corner in the spring window, so there will be some competition there too. But right now, DeCarlos Nicholson looks like a starter, and losing a starter wouldn't have been good, so I'm glad he's back.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Anything else? What did I miss since I've been gone? We talked about the national championship game a little bit. USC does get a little bit of money with Ohio State winning, I believe. It's a bigger share for the Big Ten, so get a little more cash. But Notre Dame made $20 million, and they get to keep it because they're independent. So that worked out pretty well for them.
Mm-hmm. How about the basketball team, men and women, last night getting big wins in the Midwest? Women kicked the crap out of Purdue.
That was a close one for the women's game, right? It was
in the first quarter it was, and then in the second quarter, USC outscored them. I think it was 31-2. So there goes that close game. And then on the men's side, they are playing much better on the road than at home, seemingly, and they outlasted a Nebraska team that now has lost 5 in a row, but Nebraska is a tough place to play, and USC had a great win. I think last night pretty firmly makes it so that they're going to be in the Big Ten tournament because only 15 of the 18 teams make it. And after they lost to Indiana, I remember thinking, I don't know if they're going to be in the top 15. But now at 4-4, I do think that they'll certainly be in the top 15.
Yeah.
If they can go 10-10 in the conference, then we might be talking about the NCAA tournament with them. I'm not quite there yet. I need to see a little bit more from them before I can say, I think they have a real shot at the tournament. But, I mean, if you're 500 in conference, you do, and right now they are. So they're trending in the right direction, but I do think it's going to be an up and down rest of the season for them. Some games they'll look great, other games they won't. They're inconsistent, and that's just sort of how it is.
And the women keep rolling. Juju Watkins and the whole crew there. So, I mean, that big win was at Maryland, right? Because that was like a top 10 team.
Yeah, that was
way on the other side of the country.
That was a little bit ago. They had a nice win over Indiana, too, on the road over the weekend. Indiana, not as good as Maryland, but a solid team. They are consistently in the NCAA tournament. And USC didn't really even play that well, and then they buckled down and got the win. So I think they're 14-0 since they lost to Notre Dame, and that was without Kennedy Smith. They are rolling, and I have a national championship future bet on them, so I don't think it all.
UCLA's undefeated too, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Are they undefeated? They're number one. They probably are if they're number one, but that's going to be a huge game. That's coming up in a couple weeks here, the Crosstown Showdown, the first one. The men play on Monday against UCLA, and then I forget when the women play, but I think that's next week too. That's even bigger stakes than last year, which the stakes last year were huge. Yeah,
that'll be a big ticket game. USC got the win against them last year, I believe. We'll see. The Bruins look really good too, but Juju Watkins, to be able to like turn on SportsCenter and you see like her picture up there a bunch, you're like, wow, okay, that's it's a big deal. So the basketball teams are both doing well. I don't get in that. Are you guys going to do a triple-double podcast?
Yeah, tomorrow we're going to record because there are no games this weekend.
Oh, nice. Okay. Any guests? You got?
We're hoping for a women's basketball player guest, but that has not been confirmed yet. So fingers crossed.
Cool. Yeah, I know. Working with House of Victory, like we were doing for guests here for football, it's cool. They're gonna reached out to you guys and maybe do some basketball guests. So that'll be great.
Yeah, we got Desmond Claude last week through House of Victory. So thank you.
Sweet. That's awesome. All right. Well, why don't we take a quick break? We got some questions to get to. There's a bunch in the chat that I want to answer, and then we got a couple emails and a text message. So back in a minute, everyone. All righty. We're back here on the Peristyle Podcast. Like I said, you could email us, podcast@uscfootball.com. We got a couple emails. And we got a text message to get to, and then I'll get to some of those chat ones. Let's go to Stephen Poway. He says, USC needs to bring in Ed Orgeron back out of retirement to coach the defensive line and yell at all the kids. Yes, yelling is very important, right? Riley is an offensive guru, but too quiet and cerebral to fire everyone up. Oh, I'm sorry. This was a separate one. This was Frank in Sacramento. I mashed two questions together, but there's a separate question. Or Frank doesn't make questions. He just makes statements. But, yeah, I know. Sometimes people just want to bring back familiar names. Like, I think you're good with Eric Henderson, Sean Nua coaching the defensive line. So I don't think you need to bring in a yeller coach just for the sake of having a yeller coach.
I think they're good with Eric Henderson, too. I understand wanting Orgeron because of his recruiting chops. But, hey, Henderson has some pretty good recruiting chops himself.
Yeah. And, I love Ed Orgeron. And I don't know if he would want to come back and have some kind of role, like, I wouldn't be like opposed. But I don't like when people just focus on like, I remember him, bring him back. And like, okay, well, just because you know who he is, because he coached here 20 years ago doesn't mean much. Okay. This is Stephen Poway. He says, as the scarlet and gray confetti blasted from the cannons and Notre Dame players joined arms to sing their alma mater, tears streaming down their faces, I couldn't help but wonder, was the SEC the real loser on Monday? After 8 consecutive championships with an SEC representative, 6 of those as champions, the SEC has now been out of the championship game for 2 consecutive years, and the Big Ten looks stronger than ever with Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon reloading, Michigan, Indiana, and hopefully the Trojans pushing the conference forward in 2025. Are the SEC, quote, glory days and years of, quote, total domination now solidly behind them. Will the legit 12-team playoff where winning more than reputation matters by the sea change the other conferences needed to finally, as it were, level the playing field? Or is it just because Nick Saban was the GOAT and now he's gone? LOL. Stephen Poway, fight on and win in 2025.
There's no doubt the Big Ten's better, but I do push back on the SEC, they're way down now because they haven't made the championship the last 2 years. Nick Saban leaving obviously hurt Alabama. That's a huge thing. And then this year, Georgia, their quarterback broke his arm and was out for the playoffs. So
yeah.
People seem to forget that. If he was in, would that have made a difference against Notre Dame? I certainly think so. So, yes, the Big Ten is on top, and the premier Big Ten teams have been better than the premier SEC teams the last couple of years. Let's see what Kalen DeBoer does in year 2 with a quarterback that he likes better than Milroe.
Yeah.
I kept hearing consistently out of Alabama's camp, Milroe isn't our guy, wait till we get our guy. So let's see what they look like. Georgia's recruited at a high level. Texas has the number 1 class again. Yes, you got to win the games, and they haven't done a good enough job lately, but still think the SEC is really good. And anyone who doesn't think so, I think is crazy.
Yeah, and I think there were some weird upsets that happened that maybe don't normally happen. The SEC could have had 5 teams in this. The Big Ten ended up getting the most with 4, and I think that was all deserved. But it worked out pretty well that you weren't seeing, outside of the Ohio State losing to Michigan, you didn't have those best teams kind of get upset. And the Michigan one was weird, but for Alabama losing to Vanderbilt and Ole Miss, Kentucky, and there was just a lot of those where easily those teams could have had 2 losses and then likely been in. Or you're arguing, it was hard to argue 1-loss Indiana versus a 3-loss, SEC team. But a lot of those years they're probably going to only have 2 losses, and then maybe you see them get the benefit of the doubt. But they didn't have a very good bowl record. The Big Ten had the best overall bowl record, obviously won the national championship. So I think you're putting some of that, conference bias to rest a little. And then I definitely buy into, I don't think it's the end-all be-all, but the fact that the SEC had NIL before other people did, now everyone has NIL, I think that certainly helps too. So it was a different ball game. Even when USC was winning championships, there were impermissible benefits and things like that, but certainly nothing to the level that the SEC had. And now just the fact that you can get a paycheck isn't a differentiator. It's how much can you get. I think before the SEC was actually paying kind of salary stuff, a lot of instances where other places weren't, and maybe you got a benefit here, a benefit there. But I think they had a better system that was gaming the system, and now it's sort of like a much more level playing field. So I definitely buy into that. I don't know if it's the end-all be-all. I don't say it's the end of the SEC, but I think that's leveled the playing field more than maybe even anticipated when this all got started.
Great point. And let's see what the NFL draft looks like. Is it more Big Ten players getting drafted than SEC players? Because I think pretty consistently it's been the SEC. But, again, you just pull up the recruiting rankings from 2025, Texas number 1 class, Georgia number 2 class, Oregon number 3 class, and then it's Oregon, then it's Ohio State, but then it's Auburn, it's LSU, it's A&M, Michigan, and Florida. It's the Big Ten and it's the SEC too. I still look at those 2 conferences pretty similarly, where they have the most resources and they will recruit at the top. In 2024, Georgia number 1 class, Alabama number 2, then Ohio State, then Oregon, then it's Texas, Miami, so ACC team, Florida, Auburn, LSU. The SEC is still recruiting at a higher level than these other programs, and they've had a couple down years, and I know everyone likes to rag on them, and they certainly did not deserve to have more teams in. I'm not trying to say that, but the notion that the Big Ten is miles ahead or that the SEC is in trouble, I push back against that. I think what you said, Ryan, is spot on, though. This NIL stuff has leveled the playing field a little bit, and maybe the SEC's been slow to react, but I also think there were some other factors this year, like Nick Saban leaving and Georgia's quarterback breaking his elbow or whatever happened, and that hurt the conference too.
Yeah, Roseweb 2.0. I have SEC and Kansas City Chiefs fatigue. Yeah, I think a lot of people do.
Well, hey, the SEC hasn't really been a big player the last couple of years. Let's not forget, too, Alabama did push last year's national championship to overtime in the semifinal. It wasn't
Right.
like I do think last year Florida State deserved not to be in, and that'll piss people off. But Alabama shouldn't have been in. Well, when they when they take the national champion to overtime in the semifinal, you don't really have a leg to stand on where that team didn't belong. So that always kind of bothered me. What I'm trying to say to the commenter, Kansas City, they've been in the mix every year. What is it, 7 straight AFC championship games? The SEC, they haven't been in the championship the last 2 times. So maybe the SEC fatigue is ending here, but the Kansas City fatigue doesn't seem like that's going anywhere.
No, probably not. I think people had Patriots fatigue, right?
Yeah.
Not you, obviously.
Not me, but
yeah. There are a lot of people sort of did there. Okay. Let's see. We have another email. John in Oakland.
John.
Any thoughts on why head coach Lincoln Riley is not willing to expand the size of the coaching staff now that the NCAA no longer limits on the number of assistant coaches? If you were him, what new assistant coaches position would you add? Are there signs that other programs are now expanding their coaching staffs beyond the old limit of 10 assistant coaches? Fight on, John in Oakland.
This point kind of gets lost in that, people kind of misunderstand it. And correct me if I'm wrong. Pretty much the rule just said analysts can be assistants, but you still only have 10?
You have the 10
true assistant coaches. So
they're allowed to participate on the field.
Yeah, and you can have a million analysts now. There aren't a set number of analysts, but you can call them assistant coaches. So I see why it's so confusing. But you have the traditional 10 assistants. That doesn't go anywhere. So USC and every other program in the country have those. And now you can have analysts who are now called assistant coaches, but they aren't one of the 10 assistant coaches doing more. So you can have more analysts, the old saying, now they're assistant coaches. I just probably confuse people. USC is doing more. Ryan Daugherty now is doing more, the special teams coach. And if Cliff Kingsbury was here, he would be able to do more. And USC does have a good amount of analysts doing a lot. I think they're doing what everyone else is doing. I'm sure there are other programs who have more analysts now being called assistant coaches and doing more than they would in the past, but I don't think USC is they're not doing this, we need to talk about that, they're making these mistakes. I apologize if I just confuse people, but nothing's changed with I think people think the 10 real assistant coaches, that number went out the window and you can now have as many as you want. That's not true. You can just have more analysts who are assistant coaches, but they're still technically analysts. The rule doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. It just gave analysts more power, and now you can call them assistant coaches. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's before, when you were a permanent assistant coach, and I need to look at all the different rules, but there were things that you could do. Let's just the old way of hey, if you're a walk-on versus a scholarship player, you can do this, but you can't do that. You can't come to the training table. And then they expanded the walk-on stuff to be okay, you can come to training table. You could add to their roles. And before, you could get in trouble if you're special teams analyst was on the field, showing the kicker's leg which way to or how to plant his foot. There were certain things they couldn't do as far as on-field coaching of players. And what they said was, okay, well, that's stupid. You're an analyst there. You can help these players out on the field. So it's more about expanding the roles of analysts. And, you can now say, hey, you got a special teams coordinator. He's still not designated as one of the 10, full-time assistant coaches. I'm sure there's other little nuanced differences there, but really you just expanded the roles of these analysts so they could act like coaches. And also they changed the rule about the coaching on the road, where I felt it was the only 10 assistants could go on the road.
Yeah.
Now you can say you have 10 people that can go on the road, but it doesn't have to be the full. So it's another reason the full-time assistant coach. Before that was ticket to travel on the road. Now it doesn't necessarily mean that. You could be a full-time assistant coach, but let your younger understudy be the road guy, that kind of thing.
Thank you for providing some nuance. I think I confused people more than I should have based on the question. It is confusing, but to answer the question in general, I think USC is doing pretty much what everyone else is doing.
Yeah. We have a text question from Poot in Oakland. Hello, Poot. Mario Williams transferred to Tulane, lit it up, the stat sheet. It's noted on USCFootball.com. His snap count went from 29 to start the 23 season down to 15 by the end. Why the drop-off? I don't remember him having a problem with drop passes or missing blocking assignments. He probably could have been productive for us if he stayed.
Thank you for reading my story. That was in my story. I think for whatever reason, maybe something off the field, maybe he didn't earn it in practice, but we all remember how many good receivers USC had last season. So for whatever reason, other receivers beat him out and he earned fewer reps, and Mario Williams ended up leaving, and he was the leading receiver in the American Conference this year at Tulane with over 1,000 yards. And yeah, I think he could have helped USC, but like I can't really speak to off the field or chemistry. Like maybe there was a reason that he, other than play time, and I don't know, maybe there was a reason other than football that he got fewer snaps. It did seem like he was phased out, and I'm sure there was a reason for that. I don't know the reason, so I don't blame him for transferring. But yeah, absolutely, he could have helped USC this year. They really needed help at the receiver spot, and Zachariah Branch really struggled at times. If you have Mario Williams behind him, pushing him, maybe USC would have had better success with their slot receivers outside of Mekhi Lemon.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. I mean, he had the connection with Caleb Williams, and when that was gone, I think he was gone. And, but he did have a great season for Tulane. Let's go to this chat questions. Mark says, Reggie Bush wanting to coach USC is laughable. Yeah, he wants to be. Yeah, that's great. He can get into coaching, but it's not one of those things where you just hire, you don't want to like college football head coach. You don't want to like JJ Redick this thing and be like, yeah, he's doing media. Let's hire him to be the head coach. That happens a lot more in the NBA where you get former players who just like give them a chance, and it works out for some guys and not for others. I don't think you can do that, especially a place like USC where you've had these nepotistic hires for so long that it just burned you. So yeah, I don't think you could. Certainly, I mean, if he worked his way up and he ends up being the head coach of USC someday, fine. But
he's suing the school, isn't he?
He was at some point. I don't know if he still
still think he is. Like, come on, man. What is it? Are you pissed at USC because they didn't pay you enough, like, and kind of messed up the whole sanctions and everything? Or do you want to coach at USC? Like, you can't really do both.
Yeah. Jeff had a question on Rob Ryan. Will he buy into the college football atmosphere of recruiting? We've seen it before where these former NFL guys come in and don't want to recruit. We talked about this a little bit, but
we definitely hit on this. I think it's TBD, but I do think he has a really infectious energy. And he's a guy like, we talk about who do you want to be the president? Oh, it's the person I'd want to have a beer with. Like Rob Ryan, unquestionably, you want to have a beer with him. I think that will help make him a good recruiter. And now I regret saying that because high school guys can't drink beer, but you know what I mean? He's a good person to talk to. So I think that'll help. But you mentioned he's not going to go on the road, and when guys come to campus, he'll certainly have a relationship with them there. But it's a fair question, and it's going to be determined.
Yeah, but I do like his energy, and I think it's going to I don't think that's going to be a big issue or anything. So we will see. Brandon says, biggest position of need on both offense and defense to get from the transfer portal.
Linebacker for me is
100%
the biggest one overall. So that's defense. And then offense, they've added enough on the offensive line. If things go well, to have a solid offensive line. I'm a little skeptical of that. They're fine at tight end. You could probably use a depth receiver. They could probably use an upgrade at quarterback, but
I was gonna say,
they're not going to do that. They're fine at running back. So I just think it's kind of like the NFL draft where they don't have a huge need, but like the best available. Can you go after someone to upgrade what you already have, even if what you already have is pretty good? So I'd take an impact player anywhere, even if it's a tight end. I'd take a dynamite receiver. I'd take a stud offensive lineman. Like, there isn't one spot where I say, oh, they have a gaping hole here. I think they've done a nice job of plugging some gaps on the offensive side. But if you can get a NFL draft caliber player in the future, just anywhere, I'd take that player any day of the week.
Feedy just put a question in the chat from Facebook. Thanks for logging in onto Facebook. You think Rex Ryan will stop by practice to support his brother? That would be cool.
I don't know if he'll go out of his way to come to LA, but if he's visiting Rob or if he's in LA for any reason, why not? And he can be like Aaron, or he can be like the Aaron Donald to Eric Henderson, where like, hey, I know this high profile guy who coached and you see him on TV every day. Maybe he can help with recruiting. I don't rule that out. I think it's certainly plausible. It's probably even very possible that he comes.
It's good for the whole team when you bring, guys like that. There's like, oh, I know who that is, and you have relationships. It's your Rolodex gets bigger, and you can bring in a guy that you've seen on TV. I think it certainly helps, and yeah, I don't see why that would be a problem. Craig, who will get the offensive coordinator designation?
I don't know if they're going to have one.
Yeah, they might not.
We'll see, though. They usually kind of sneakily change the titles, and then they just update the roster, and we don't know until they update the roster. But that doesn't usually happen until after spring camp. So maybe they'll make some tweaks when they put in Chad Savage and Rob Ryan on their official roster, and maybe they'll name an offensive coordinator then. Maybe Dennis Simmons gets the title now. I mean, he has a million titles already, right? Isn't he already like assistant to the head coach? So
there's a whole bunch of titles.
Maybe Luke Heward. I don't really know.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. This is next one. I think it's Rose Web 2.0. Altadena Trojan. We could go with it. Hey, Ryan and CM. What's the latest on the defensive line status and recruits in the portal? Thanks.
I think they're all set in the middle with Jakeem Stewart coming in and Keyshawn Silver and Jamal Jarrett from the portal coming in. Those are some great additions alongside Devin Tompkins and some of the younger returning players in the middle. So they seem to me to be all set there. I do think they want an edge rusher to come in because right now they only have 4 scholarship edge rushers in Fountain, Lucas, Braylon Shelby, and Lorenzo Cowan. They lost a couple edge guys to the transfer portal, and I think it would behoove them to bring in someone else. They tried to get Jamori Robinson, who was, I think, the Sun Belt Conference Player of the Year at UTSA. For whatever reason, he did not qualify academically at USC, and now I think he's at West Virginia.
Okay.
So that was a tough blow. He really could have helped. I expect them to target someone of a similar stature, someone who can come in, play right away, be an impact player for them on the edge to come in on the spring window.
Let's go to Craig. What's the point of recruiting high school guys if you're not going to play them until they're juniors? Linebackers and DBs won't have experience, but behind a strong defensive line, everyone improves.
I just think now it's a player-by-player basis. And like we saw, there was a deal with Tackett Curtis. If you come to USC, we think you're the number 1 linebacker. We're going to play you right away. And sometimes
that's a mistake.
Yeah. Coaching staffs choose that. Other guys, they know they're going to be a developmental piece and they're going to have to sit. I don't think what the commenter is talking about happens like all the time. Sometimes freshmen come in, like Cameron Fountain played a pretty solid role this year. The plan for him was to redshirt, but they ended up needing him, and he ended up playing a lot at the end of the season. So he doesn't fit that example, and he was a top 100 guy, I think. So he's someone who you would want to see right away. In the era of the transfer portal, though, you kind of have to pick your poison, where if you bring in a high-profile guy but you have good players in front of them, you'll probably have to force that high-profile guy into the mix early to keep him happy. I think Bud Elliott tweeted, like, look at Jalen Carter on the Eagles. He had that huge game in the playoffs against the Rams, just destroyed that Rams offensive line. He was a backup at Georgia for a time, and now in the transfer portal era, that would never happen. So you kind of, if you have a guy who you might have players ahead of him who are better right now, you might have to keep that person happy with a higher ceiling by playing him, and I think that's what teams are running into all across the country. So, yeah, it's a good question, though, because if you do not play your freshman for the first 2 years, I don't blame them for leaving.
Yeah, and I would say situations like that, you have to have a philosophy when you're building your roster. There's different ways to skin a cat. Like, you can do it different ways, right? Is that an old guy saying? Pretty old person.
I like it.
Why would you want to skin a cat? I don't know, but that's a saying. Yeah, we're seeing at places like Colorado, they are focusing more on the portal. And I know Lincoln Riley talked about wanting to build more through high school recruiting. Yes, you can lose some guys sometimes, but sometimes you it makes it easier because the churn through the high school players. You might you recruit a guy that you think could work out from the high school ranks, and they get to campus, and you're like, you don't think he can play. He looks around and is like, I can't play with these guys, and then he's going to leave on his own instead of like just sticking around and taking up a roster spot. And there'll be some guys that are like, hey, I think I can play somewhere else, and you're waiting behind people, and you might lose them too. But I think for USC, building through the high school ranks makes a lot of sense, and you can develop guys and then pay them if they look good. If it's an Elijah Page that you're like by the end of his freshman year, like, all right, he's going to be your future at left tackle. We know we got to pay him, but someone you recruited and you got to develop him and keep him around, as opposed to going out and just buying a left tackle somewhere. So I think for USC, it still makes the most sense to build through high school recruiting, and they've sort of fallen, they haven't killed it like I think they should have the last couple of years. But we'll see. It's getting better. And I think you still have to like add some studs from the portal. But for me, I think USC's best off trying to build the core through high school talent and then adding the pieces from the portal as you see fit.
Look at Ohio State and Notre Dame. I think Ohio State, 19 of their 22 starters were high school recruits who signed with the Buckeyes. Now, Ohio State did a really good job of some guys who were on the fence about leaving for the NFL, bringing them back with NIL. That's such a good problem to have. That's ideally how you want to use most of your NIL money to retain the top players, and USC has done that with Kamari Ramsey. They thought they did that with Pregnon, but he ends up going to Oregon. So you're seeing a little bit of what Ohio State did at USC, which that's certainly a good program to emulate. But Notre Dame, too, their quarterback was a transfer. Ohio State's quarterback was a transfer. So you do have some instances where the portal can help you. But Notre Dame had a lot of guys who they signed from the high school ranks as a part of that team, too.
Yeah, and Ohio State's big deal was sort of like what Michigan did last year. They kept a lot of their dudes that were going to go to the NFL. Like that, it was more about normally in normal situations, all those guys are leaving. In the NIL world, you could pay them to stick around for one more year and make a run. So I think that was a big part of it too. Derek, hello, Ryan. Did you enjoy Hawaii for work? You're a lucky man. I did. I did enjoy Hawaii for work. I love going to that, covering that high school all-star game. It's been going on for more than 10 years. I used to do was the Army All-American Bowl. Now it's the Navy All-American Bowl, but in San Antonio. It's funny. I think 2018, I found a picture of me, Gerard, and Chris Trevino, like getting Mexican food somewhere on the Riverwalk or whatever. But that was always like New Year's Eve in San Antonio, which I loved doing for a while. But after a little while, I'm like, I don't need to do this. But then the Polynesian Bowl comes up, and I'm like, hey, I'll cover Hawaii. It's good. And I don't know, no one on the staff really seemed to want to do it. Like Jarrett came with me one year. You would probably go, right? Like
yeah.
But Gerard, like Chris, even was like, I don't want to. I'm like, so I take it. I take a one for the team there,
take
guys.
The hit.
And I'll go to Hawaii for you guys just because it's great. Okay, let's see. We've got Jeff he says, I talk about skinning cats. He says, skinning cats and killing birds, we've got some odd sayings. Yeah, like kill two birds with one stone. Like, how many opportunities are you having to try, like, God, I'd really like to kill those two birds, but I only got one rock here. So, like, I'm going to try to, I don't know. I don't know how that ever became a thing, but I guess it's a thing. He had a couple questions, too. He said, is this going to be our last trip to South Bend with the contract ending in 2026?
I hope not, but I don't
think it will be.
I do understand how USC fans and a lot of people in college football, I think most people understand that Notre Dame needs USC more than USC needs Notre Dame. So
yeah, that is a good point.
I wonder if they will join the Big Ten in the future. It doesn't seem like it. Why would they when NBC pays them so much money to have their own TV deal? And if they can continue to compete, they don't really need it. So
unless a lot of the other programs backed out and they're like, if the SEC and the Big Ten came together and said, we're not going to play you, and you're playing, Navy and
if they strong-armed them.
Well, you're not going to get games against us, so go undefeated or you're not making the playoff.
But let's be realistic. If Charlie Weiss was the coach and they were down like they used to be down and USC was up and Notre Dame just wasn't very good and USC was the dominant team, would we be saying, Notre Dame needs this game against USC, they'd be saying, "Oh, it's an easy win for us. It's a rivalry game. We're better. I don't want this game to go anywhere."
Yeah.
But now that Notre Dame's good and USC isn't as good, it's they need us. They need us. It's true, but I just wonder, would people be saying the same thing if Notre Dame wasn't as good and USC was the dominant team? I don't think so.
Let's go. Jeff also wants to know, would USC have been better off getting Will Howard in the portal?
Probably.
Yes.
Probably. I don't think it would have resulted in some crazy swing where all of a sudden USC is competing for a Big Ten championship or the college football playoff. But, I mean, he's better than Maeva, I think, and he's better than Miller Moss for sure.
Yeah, so I think they would have been better off. Craig, who's taller, Mick Cronin or Eric Musselman?
It might be Mick Cronin.
Musselman is not tall.
No, both guys are pretty short. That's a funny question.
Yeah. Both guys have some fiery personalities and stuff. We got a couple more, and then we'll let you guys go. Fight on Natties. Hello, Ryan and CM. Who are our main targets in this last recruiting high school / portal signing period, February 5th?
Right now, the linebacker, AJ Tuatele, he's a Polynesian kid out of Vegas, is the guy USC's going after, the hardest linebacker. Texas just offered him. So it sounds like USC has a little bit of competition, but he did visit USC last weekend, I think, and they're in a good position for him unless Texas makes some crazy Hail Mary offer at the end, so I'd watch out for him. And then USC was courting an edge rusher, Jaden Ramos, out of Texas, who visited last weekend, but he left campus without an offer, and I don't know where things stand with him. I think he would have committed on the spot if USC offered him and said, "You're our guy," but it doesn't seem like that ended up happening, so maybe they'll pivot to someone else. Maybe they just, for whatever reason, didn't like how he worked out. If they worked him out, I'm not really sure where things stand with him, but it seems like things have cooled.
Yeah. All right, we got one last one from Facebook. Feedy, and we actually talked about this, I think, before we went on air, but question, why isn't USC recruiting hard Southern California high school powerhouses like St. John Bosco, Mater Dei? Is NIL the reason why they can't get these high school players?
There's certainly been a switch. USC has gone out of its way to show that they've been at Mater Dei, been at St. John Bosco this cycle, so they're trying.
Yeah.
I do think Chad Savage came in to really prioritize Mater Dei's talented tight end, Mark Bowman, who is 2027 right now, but there's a rumor he's going to reclassify to 2026, so he's a Mater Dei target. USC is all over, and off the top of my head, I know they have a million guys, both schools, so I don't know exactly who USC's going after really, really hard other than Bowman right now, but I'm sure it's other guys. I do think in the past, Lincoln Riley thought, I don't really need them.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
He did go really hard at Mateo Uiagalelei, and that ended up not working out. He goes to Oregon. We know Mateo Uiagalelei's dad has a relationship with prospects, and I don't think USC and him are really that have a strong relationship, even though the dad was representing Maeva when he transferred over to USC, but he's since gone their separate ways. And the top defensive lineman at Mater Dei, Tom, is an Oregon commit, and he works with Uiagalelei's father, so I don't think that USC will have much traction there. But he's kind of a guy in the NIL space where maybe he works with a lot of top guys, but I don't know. Do you want to have a relationship with him? I haven't heard glowing reviews about him, so I don't really blame USC for not being involved there. So at first, I think overall, Riley tried to. The guys kind of spurned him for whatever reason at Mater Dei and Bosco. He was like, okay, I don't need you. And now he's kind of coming back like, oh, we probably should be looking at those guys.
That was a bad mistake. I think he tried to cherry pick some stuff out of there. And you needed we're going to covet these campuses. We're going to talk to everybody because there's going to be dudes there. You can't just I'm going to show up and try to pick this one guy. That has to be part of your systematic approach. And it looks like now they're doing it more. They're hitting California, much harder, visiting a ton of schools. Coaches are all over the place. That's what you need it to be. They weren't doing it. They weren't recruiting Southern California hard enough. It's in your backyard. You just have to like carpet bomb this whole area, and especially the powers. And they weren't doing that. They weren't doing enough. I know USC would say, "Oh, we did the." No, you were not doing enough, and there looks like they're going to do enough now, or you're trying to really focus on that, and you need to, because there's going to be dudes there, and you go visit, and there's some freshman that's going to be a 5-star. It's there's enough talent there that you just have to be all over that school, not. Oh, we like Mateo Ugalele, and we're going to go. Like, no, you like everybody. You're going to like have a relationship with everyone over there. Every one of your coaches has been there. They all know what's going on. You need that, not what USC was doing before. But to their credit, it looks like they've shifted, realizing like, oh, we better, one of our biggest assets is having access to Southern California talent. We're not going to ignore it like they had for the last couple of years. And
Chad Savage coming in will help with that massively. He has great relationships all over the state, especially in Southern California. I was blown away with all the feedback I got from high school coaches on him. They really like him. So I think that was another step towards recruiting locally, which is good. Jeff says the LA Times ran a piece on how bad the relationship between Mater Dei and USC is. I did not check that out, but that was like other sports. That was it wasn't like a football thing. I don't think it had a lot to do with football, but I might be misremembering. But when I looked at that, I thought it was just other sports using connections between that school and USC to get people into USC. But if I'm not right on that, please comment. But that's sort of how I remember that story. I don't think it was necessarily a big football thing. Okay, but I think in general you want those relationships to be strong on the football side. To me, it was more about your attitude towards local high schools more than specific things with Mater Dei or some coach there or whatever. Like I think for USC, having a legit general manager can come in and be like, we have to be all over Mater Dei and St. John Bosco and Corona Centennial, and we need to build these relationships. And I just don't think it's been a priority. It looks like it's more of a priority now. I think having a GM knowing that, look, not just this year, but in years down the road, we're going to get players out of these high schools. And look at the national powers that have Mater Dei or St. John Bosco kids on their roster. If they're good enough to play there, they're good enough to play at USC. So to me, it's more about your systematic approach than any individual relationships with a certain high school. And I think it looks like the approach is changing. And I think having a GM would change it even more. And we always hear the people say, oh, well, look at the Mater Dei and Bosco guys. Who's really worked out? Xavier Brown was a good corner for Alabama this year, true freshman starter. And we all watched Kingston Viliamu-Asa when he wasn't hurt all year at Notre Dame. And that's one that's hard to fault USC because they really tried with him. So I don't really look at them and say, oh, they really messed up. They gave it their best shot with him, and he just chose Notre Dame. But that's a one that's going to burn them for the next couple of years. He is really, really good. All righty. Oregon's getting a bunch of guys out of those schools and getting production. Mateo Uiagalelei had an awesome year at edge for Oregon. It's time to retire the notion that I see some USC fans say, like, oh, we don't need guys at those schools. Yes, you do. Yeah. Even for like just depth, it needs to be a pipeline. You need to be getting guys from those schools. Kamori House at Washington is now in North Carolina. He had the game-winning tackle against USC. Now, as time has gone on, a couple of years ago, there weren't a lot of examples to point to outside of Bryce Young, but now those guys are going elsewhere and having big impacts. Yes. All guys that could have helped USC. So there's plenty of guys from Mater Dei and St. John Bosco that could have been helpful for USC's roster, and they didn't recruit those schools like they felt like there were guys that could help, and they were wrong. And so I think you have to shift the focus a little bit, and it looks like from what they're doing so far that they have shifted the focus there. And like I said, getting a GM, I'm sure it'll shift even more. All right, I think that's it. Another good show, Ryan. I love these off-season shows. We got a smorgasbord of topics. Yeah, good stuff. Thanks for all the questions and everybody. And don't forget, go over to your Apple podcasting app and leave us a 5-star rating and review. We appreciate it very much. We also appreciate you guys watching live on Facebook and YouTube. It's a lot of fun. And of course,
The replay of the show will be up there in perpetuity until whatever YouTube or Facebook go away or zombie apocalypse or whatever happens. But, they're up there, and you can watch our old shows if you want. And, of course, you can listen across any podcasting platform that's out there. You can get the Peristyle Podcast. Been doing this since 2008, Connor.
Wow.
2008 from our podcast. It's a long...
I think I was in middle school then.
Yeah, nice. We were definitely one of the first. Yeah. We've been on the forefront of some of these technological advances.
And let me just say, as someone who looks at all the USC coverage from everywhere, if you're not following USCfootball.com, you're doing yourself a big disservice. Ryan, I got to give you credit. You've hired some good people, man.
Well, thanks.
And I'm not talking about me. Chris, Gerard,
yeah.
Shotgun, just our team. What separates us is we have so many people who are so plugged in, who can give you all these viewpoints. And I mean, I'm just very proud of what we're doing. So I think you should follow us and subscribe over at USCfootball.com.
I'm proud of it too. And like Connor said, go check it out. If you're just listening and you're not on the website, it's great. You get 30% off an annual membership. You will not regret it.
No.
Lots of good nuggets. Just being on the Peristyle, reading what everyone has to say. 24 hours a day, you get stuff over there. So it's cool. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for Connor Morrissette. I am Ryan Abraham. Hope you guys enjoyed the show, and we will talk to you next time.